On February 9th of 2004, 21-year-old UMass student Maura Murray drove from her dorm in Amherst, Massachusetts to the White Mountains of New Hampshire.
At approximately 7:27 p.m., Maura spun out her 1996 Saturn on a hairpin turn on Route 112 in North Haverhill. There has never been a credible sighting of Maura since.
Maura is 5 foot 7 inches tall. She weighs 120 pounds, and she has brown hair and hazel eyes.
If you have any information regarding Maura's disappearance, please submit it to us,
The Murray family at MauraMurrayFamilyDirect@gmail.com.
or the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit.
This is Missing Maura Murray. Welcome back to the Missing Maura Murray podcast. I'm Tim, being joined by Lance. How are you today, Lance?
I am doing so well. How are you today, Tim?
I'm doing really well and excellent, actually, because our guest, Lance, is quite inspiring, isn't she?
Yeah, she just is, like you said, a powerhouse. I think we were talking off air. You said she was a powerhouse. This is Heather Bish. It's the sister of Molly Bish, who went missing in 2000, in June of 2000. And her remains turned up 3 years later on June 9th in 2003. And Heather has championed the cause for justice in numerous sectors in her life. And to hear her tell her story was, to say the least, emotional.
Yeah, it was emotional and, again, inspiring because she has tried everything, along with her family, her mom and her dad, and some of the details in the case are so disturbing and sort of really just gives you visuals, but you can really feel the pain and torture the Bish family has gone through.
Yeah, it's amazing because when this happened, it was the largest and most expensive search for a missing person ever in the state of Massachusetts. It appeared on numerous television shows, and with all of that coverage and all of the searching, it still took 3 years. The remains were found within 5 miles of the house. So it's actually right in between where she went missing at the lake and the house. So the lake's 5 miles away. It was something like 2.5 miles in between both locations. Despite all of that, there's still no resolution. But the Bish family, with Maggie and John Bish, that's Heather's parents, and Heather herself, they founded the Molly Bish Center and Foundation, which is in collaboration with Anna Marie College, and it's also founded by the parents of Holly Peranian, who went missing in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. So they were able to take these tragedies and bring them together to try to promote some good and some justice.
Yeah, and she's also working with State Senator Ann Goby, and that's from Massachusetts. And so she is behind this new bill that was filed back in January, I believe, which allows law enforcement to hunt for violent criminals on DNA databases using familial searches. So you can see she's cutting edge.
Yeah, she's been working at this for so long as well. And when you hear her voice and you hear how she still gets emotional about her sister, and she still gets fired up about the lack of justice, not only with Molly's case, but other cases. The Molly Bish Center, they focus on protecting children and the elderly, and you know that Heather has taken this tragedy and it's really become her life, and she's doing such an amazing job with it.
It really is. And she sort of has a call to action at the end of the episode where she asks you to call your state rep. And she's really just talking to residents of Massachusetts in this specific case because there is a bill that has been presented that has not been passed yet. And so she's asking Massachusetts residents to call their state rep so they can tell their senator that their constituent supports familial DNA searching.
That is so important because we see it every day now, right, Tim? We see so many moments where DNA has come back, and just recently, I think they connected some dude to a couple of murders. It's solving everything right now, and this is so important for not only Molly's case, but all of the other cases that are out there, these cold cases that we talk about and try to raise awareness for. And for anybody out there who wants to get more information on the Molly Bish Center for Protection of Children and the Elderly, you can go to annamarie.edu/about/MBC.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much for listening. And we'll have more soon on when our live show with Heather Bish will happen. Heather Bish, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. How you doing? You hanging in there during this pandemic?
I am. I'm on my 56th day of being sort of housebound, so I think I've found a groove with lots of dog walking, some yoga. Now I can get out in the sunshine and run, so that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely helpful to get outside, do a little exercising if possible, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know what the dogs are going to do when I have to go back to work.
I know. I think that's going to be the mystery pandemic, the dog pandemic. After all this is done, we're going to have a bunch of depressed dogs.
I know. We're going to have to start a new business with doggy daycare is booming.
But really happy cats.
I know. I was just going to say on the reverse of that, we'll have exceptionally happy cats.
Yeah.
So Heather, we've been talking about doing a show together in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is opening a new theater, and it's really cool sort of convergence of people, and we had talked to you about doing it, and there's some really kind of positive reasons why we want to do this and talk now. There's a bill that is out there. But let's go back, if you don't mind, a little bit and talk about your sister Molly and what it was like when she went missing.
Sure. Almost 20 years ago, next month. So it's hard to believe. It was in late May that we started finding the bathing suit and pieces of Molly 17 years ago. So this time of year always has a very somber time for me and my family. But I was 23. I grew up in just a normal working class family. My father was a probation officer. My mom was a teacher. I was the oldest sibling, and my brother John was 3 years younger, and Molly was 6 years younger. John had been lifeguarding at Cummins Pond for 3 years prior to Molly getting this job. So we felt comfortable and familiar with those duties. And Molly had trained all winter to become a lifeguard. She was a strong athlete, a strong swimmer. So we felt very comfortable with her taking this position. I do remember having some slight concerns just about the area. Cummins Pond is a remote location in Warren, Massachusetts. Many people that live in Warren don't even know where Cummins Pond is. It's mainly used for fishing. It has had some life breathed into it over the last, I guess, 25 years or so. They started doing swimming lessons there. But generally, if you lived in the neighborhood, you knew about Cummins Pond. But if you lived across town or in West Warren, you weren't very familiar with it. It wasn't a super popular place, but I knew it was a place where some of the older people in town might smoke weed or do some drugs, drinking in the woods around that area. So I was a little nervous about that and had mentioned that to my mom and Molly. And my dad gave Molly what we would call back in those days. Of course, this is really before cell phones came into practice, and walking around with pepper spray was popular. My dad was a probation officer, so he had what we would call a little Kubaton that he kept on his key ring. And so he gave that to Molly and said, anyone gives you a hard time. I don't know how exactly she would protect herself with that, but it's symbolic of she would be able to protect herself. So we didn't. I mean, we didn't lock our doors. We didn't. We knew we felt like we lived in this community for a long time. I was born in Michigan. My mom is from Michigan, but my dad had grown up in Westmoreland. So we were very, familiar with the people that, our neighbors and our community members. So we felt very safe. Molly was on her eighth day of work. She spent the 3 previous weeks being trained by my brother to do the job. And my brother had gotten a job in construction and was really excited about that. He was home for the summer from college and was looking to really make some good money. And he loved using his hands, so that was a perfect job for him to move into. And like I said, we felt very safe about Molly being at the pond. So we really didn't expect um, the level of crime that happened. So when my mother received a phone call at 1 in the afternoon on the Tuesday that Molly went missing, we knew something was off. Molly's friend had been hit by a car. Someone on her softball team had been actually hit by a car the day before. So the town was already living in this sort of fearful tragedy that had unfolded the afternoon before. And my mom had woken Molly up that morning in a very special way because of that news. And she crawled into bed with Molly and told her about her friend and said they would say some prayers and they would check on her later in the afternoon, and we were just gonna pray all day that she would be okay. And she really had some intimate moments with Molly before going to work. So Molly, we know Molly was sad that day, but Molly wasn't an irrational child. She was very responsible. She played 3 sports. She was an honor roll student. She babysat. She was close to all of us, close to her friends. Um, she was happy, she in her life. I mean, that particular morning, I think she was sad about her friend, but she was in a good place. So we had no, indication anything. There was no thoughts for us that Molly would run away or anything like that. So at 1 o'clock, when my mom received the news that Molly was missing, she called me immediately. I at the time lived a mile down the street from my parents. I had a 10-month-old child, and I jumped in the car and said, "I'll meet you at the pond." And by the time I got to the center of our town in Warren, I saw my mom kind of driving crazy and she's yelling out the window, "Stop at the police station! Stop at the police station!" So I never even made it to the pond. I immediately went to the police station, grabbed my baby out of her car seat, and went with my mother into the police station. And my mother was frantic. She had gone to the pond. There was it was like the first day of swimming lessons, so that was another reason why we knew Molly wouldn't leave. Molly again was very conscientious. She was nervous about having to be responsible for swimming lessons, and were parents going to stay and watch your kids? What was it going to be like? So she was, again, it was for us, and knowing the behavior of the victim, we knew she wouldn't leave. When my mom went there, there was a woman acting as a lifeguard. So Molly's at the time there was no lifeguard chair. Molly just had a beach chair that she set up, and she had a first aid kit that was probably bigger than a tackle box, like something you could put your feet on, and sort of rest your feet on to get like some sun or something. And it was open, and the whistle was hanging on the chair. The walkie-talkie was in the sand next to the chair, and her shoes were on the ground as if she had just taken them off. And the woman at the beach that was acting as the lifeguard told my mother, "We haven't seen the lifeguard all day," and they seemed like kind of annoyed, like she took off. And my mom said, "Well, it doesn't make sense. I just dropped her off, and her shoes are here now." Molly's shoes being there is incredibly significant to my mom and I because, again, knowing the behavior of the victim is incredibly important in cases like this. And Molly didn't walk around without her shoes on. Molly didn't like that hippie feeling of grounding or having grass in your feet. She thought it felt icky and it was tickly, and she didn't like anything squishy or gross oozing up between her toes. She always had those those like shower sports shoes that you wear.
Like Crocs.
Yeah, so she would never go anywhere without her shoes on. So that was our first indication that something was really wrong. So my mom, as we went into the police station, asked the police officer on duty to call the chief. He was an old friend of my father's, and she wanted to find my father. my father, again, like I said, was a probation officer at the time, and often in those days he would go out on the road checking on his clients. And again, this is early cell phone days, so imagine those movies from the late 90s. What kind of cell phone you have? I mean, you fold it out in 4 different ways and pull up the antenna. That's what he was sort of working with. So
Right.
we couldn't reach him, we couldn't find him. The officer on duty said she probably just took off with her friends. And I said to, it was Officer Earl Desert, and I said to him, but she didn't have her shoes on. And he just kind of put his hands up, and I said, well, did you check her friends? And he said, no. And now, again, this is 3 hours after she was dropped off at the pond. So what the heck were they doing for 3 hours? Not looking for the missing town employee, for sure. So I said, well, I'm going to go check her friends. I'm going to go get her boyfriend. I'm going to go look around. I'll meet you back at the pond. So I went to a couple different. Actually went to my friend Nicole's house and picked her up so she could help me with the baby. We had been planning to go swimming at her pool that day, so she was expecting us. So she jumped in the car with me, and we rode around to a couple of Molly's friends' houses and stopped at Steve Lucas's house. And Steve Lucas was Molly's boyfriend at the time. It was an early relationship. They had been together about 3 months. If someone that Molly, again, we're from a small town. I had about 50 people in my graduating class, and I think those numbers probably have doubled by now. But you pretty much know everybody. Everyone that you go to school with, you get to know in some capacity through your experiences and the 12 years of being in high school or elementary school together. So you know, it, she had known Steve. He was from a troubled family, some domestic violence, some uh, alcohol issues, and so my parents didn't allow her to go to his house. Steve was allowed to come visit us. There were some strict guidelines with that relationship, and I think here's a kid who's his stepfather is abusive to his mother. He's got some mild learning disabilities and certainly no parental guidance in how to react to anything. So, I think immediately the police, you automatically go to the family and to the boyfriend in many of in these cases, and I understand that, but the the level that was placed on Steve was really a lot for a 16-year-old boy with a troubled family. There wasn't anyone helping Steve. There wasn't anyone advocating or saying, maybe it's not the boyfriend this time, or maybe look at the Parks Commission, or maybe look at the police officers on duty
Yeah.
instead of just, classic. Yeah, he comes from a bad home. I think he was an easy target. Um, to me, Steve Lucas is the second biggest victim in this case. He died in 2008 or 2009. He just could not beat what happened to him in this case and what happened to Molly. Um, so it's very sad. But again, I picked up Steve Lucas. He came with me to the pond. His family came down. As we got to the pond, when I got to the pond, the fire department was already searching for Molly in the pond. I think, again, coming from a small town and people knowing each other, the fire department reacted right away, and they did the best they could. And my brother was one that would go out and do a morning swim. Again, my sister doesn't like icky things, so she would not jump in a pond and go for a swim. She was more really there to get, her experience as a lifeguard, get some sun and hang out with kids, not really into like swimming laps or anything like that. She was more of a pool kind of girl. So, I never thought she was in the pond, but I think it was a proper call, and the fire department was searching for her. Meanwhile, no one had found my father yet, so I think police in all different towns were looking for his vehicle. So it was a little chaotic, and I just remember not knowing what to do and thinking something, maybe she had been, I kept thinking, well, maybe if she'd been raped, maybe she was hurt. Maybe she'd sprained her ankle. She was like in the periphery of the woods surrounding the pond and someone would find her. There was some scraggly searches happening. People just from the community were just taking their own and the police, the state police by then were there and had organized some minimal searches. But the crime scene was completely debilitated. There was no preservation of the crime scene.
Mm.
The hours quickly went by. When my brother was found, I'll never forget. He ran and jumped into the pond and just kept diving and diving, and he felt like he knew spots in that pond that maybe other people didn't know because he had swam it every day for 3 years. So he was just screaming for Molly and diving up and down, and the state police had to drag him out of that pond and tell him that he wasn't going to be able to find her. Um, and then when my dad came, it's so crazy how your life can change in a second, and everything changes. Like, I'm 23 years old and I have a baby and my parents are helping me and I'm still sort of a kid. And in that second, everything changed. My father came and he wasn't the same father anymore. He was completely broken and repeating. He was like dumbfounded, like she was in the pond, like she drowned. He could not like register the information. He just like was kind of repeating, and then very quickly after he arrived, the police took my parents to the police station. No one told us where they went. They were just gone. I mean, I guess over this time, my brother and I have had the opportunity to meet other siblings of abductions, and the experiences are generally similar. And I guess I have to be grateful that I was 23 at the time and I was surrounded by my family and neighbors and friends. But very quickly, you start thinking, how well do I know my neighbor? How well do I know my friends? And how did they get here so quickly? And what do they do home during the day on a Tuesday? So that once comforting closeness and feeling of being in a community changes very quickly. Again, everything sort of changed that day. But we had to eventually go home, and I think that would probably be the hardest day of my life is when we had to go home, and we didn't know where Molly was. We didn't know if she was being hurt. We didn't know if she was cold. We didn't know if someone was torturing her or why they would take her or how we could get her back or what to do at all. Um, we had to go to sleep and I had to feed a baby and take care of a baby, and I just felt like I was on Mars. I did not sleep that night, and I remember running out as soon as the sun came up in the sky and thinking maybe that person might have dropped her off. Like I said, lived a mile down the street from my parents' house, so it was my grandmother had left me her duplex when she had passed away a couple of years prior. So I was, in a family home, and I just thought maybe this person would just leave her in our yard, and I just searched the yard and I searched up and down the road, and um, there was no sign of her. They had organized a search the next day, and my brother and I went down. Of course, they wouldn't let us search. I mean, they let us to believe that we might be able to search, but they didn't let us search. But I do remember one of the police officers saying, "She's probably just tripping in the woods." And I thought, how odd,
Come on.
Like tripping on drugs.
like tripping on drugs. I thought it was odd for several reasons. First of all, this particular police officer knew my family, knew my father was a probation officer. For some reason, at the time, he had a real zest, I guess you could say, for these young kids, busting them, and he particularly was advocating that Steve Lucas did this. He was the biggest one screaming and pointing at Steve Lucas. And again, my mom's a teacher. My mom's a special ed teacher. My dad's a probation officer. They kind of know some stuff, and they just felt like this kid, yeah, he's got a screwed up life, but we don't really think he's got the capacity to abduct a child and keep it from us, hide her. We have state police crawling all over this town, and to continue lying, yeah, maybe if anything, if Steve Lucas was capable of anything, getting in a fight with her and saying some inappropriate things or yelling at her, I don't think he was even capable of hitting her. This kid was a kid who had been a victim of domestic violence and violence in the home. He wasn't. He was scared. He wasn't perpetuating that cycle. So it was very odd, and it sent off some strong alarm bells for me, and continues to be something that I hold on to as one of my first experiences, because I just think this officer, again, is saying my sister's doing drugs when there's no evidence of her doing drugs, none at all. I mean, none of her behavior prior to her disappearing or that day would lead anyone to believe she's tripping in the woods. And why would you think that and not, I don't know, not something more, I don't know, like someone like one of the fishermen could have taken her. Or later we found out that the parks commissioner had been, sexually abusing his own children and stepchildren. I still get leads today from young women who are CNAs going into this man's house that say he's sexually, he's sexually inappropriate with them constantly. Just a couple months ago, I got a lead from a girl. Now, I feel like if this guy, we're responsible for Molly's demise, that, we're sitting here watching these young women go into his home, that there's sort of an absolute responsibility on sort of ruling this character out of the picture. But the state police haven't been able to do that yet. The Parks Commissioner also has a lot of interesting coincidences on this day. So, like I said, we later found out he had some sexual issues with family members, but the morning of Molly's disappearance, he ran into my brother at a hardware store in West Brookfield, which is the next town over from Warren, and he talked to John like nothing, and he was buying rope and duct tape. And then he later told the police when the lifeguard was called in missing by the mother, said arrived at the pond that day. And he spoke to the police. He said, "Oh well, John's working, not Molly." But yet he knew Molly was working. He saw John that morning, so he too led the investigation astray right from the beginning. There was confusion about who was actually working.
And that was one of the police officers?
That was a parks commissioner. In our town, we have a parks commissioner who is in charge of the lifeguards and like some sports events and different things in town, keeping the parks up.
Gotcha.
The fields, up or whatever. I don't know.
And you found out later on that he also had some history of sexual violence?
Yes.
And he was buying rope and duct tape?
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. And again, the state police don't always, it's not like on Law and Order on TV. The state police don't share information in an investigation. So although I know some people have provided DNA, I don't know who has. And I don't know if that DNA has been tested against a small amount of DNA that we do have in Molly's case. So because Molly's crime scene was disturbed, there's very little evidence from the crime scene. However, we are very fortunate 3 years after Molly disappeared that we were able to find Molly. Over those 3 years, we had a number of different suspects. We lived in fear. The first couple of weeks, we didn't even leave the house. I think there was a police officer at the end of my parents' driveway. So it's very much like living how we are today in this pandemic.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah.
Coincidentally.
So real quick, I just wanted to ask real quick, when you say the crime scene was disturbed, the crime scene was the spot on the beach, right? Where the shoes were?
Right.
Okay.
So I think it was a day or two later that they were able to bring in some bloodhounds. It might have even been a week. I can't remember the timeline exactly. It was a certain amount of time that wasn't best case scenario either. The bloodhounds did so. Like I said, Molly's in a folding beach chair, and the pond is surrounded. It's on a dead end street, and it's surrounded by woods and trails. People go bike riding, they go hiking, they go take their dogs for walks, and four wheelers go back there. At the time, I do think we had a bike cop that would ride the trails a bit, But the bloodhounds went up a trail behind Molly's chair, there were several trails or little trails, and one of those little trails led to a graveyard. So the cemetery is key because we think that the person might have been waiting for Molly. And if you could get park in the cemetery, you could walk that short trail and sort of have a higher level ground view, waiting for the lifeguard to come. You can pretty much see if there's any fishermen on the pond or any activity, and then you could easily grab her or call her. There's some indication that the first aid kit was open, so it might be that someone feigned an injury and Molly just jumped up without putting her shoes on to go see if they needed help. And they could have grabbed her really quickly that way. Molly was 5'7". She was athletic. She was strong. I mean, it would have taken a lot to get her out of there without a lot of noise and damage. I've walked that trail without shoes on, grabbing at leaves. It's definitely possible without leaving blood or DNA, but uh, uncertain. The other piece of this is that the day before Molly disappeared, my mother had dropped her off and saw a man sitting in a white car smoking a cigarette. And it was early, it's like 9, 10 o'clock, and my mom's thinking, what is this guy doing here at the beach? He kind of gave her a weird feeling, and Molly like had bound out of the car and was running up to the lifeguard chair. My mom was just like fiddling in her car for a minute, like waiting to see if the guy would leave. And again, my mom's a teacher, so she kind of gave him that teacher stare, like, what are you doing? I know you're doing something, kind of thing.
Right.
And he didn't budge. He just stayed there and confidently smoked his cigarette. And he smoked very effeminately. So that was something. And my mom got a real good look at him, and she got nervous. And so she ended up getting out of the car and going to sit with Molly for a while, and talking to her like, what are the people like that come here, and what do you feel safe? You sure this is okay? And Molly said, Mom, it's okay. It's just fishermen. And so my mom went back and the guy was gone. So she was like, oh, maybe I'm just overreacting. And she went about her day, not thinking about it until the next day when Molly disappeared. There was some witnesses that have said that they saw the white car at a car cleaning place that's at the end of the road where Cummins Pond is. So it's possible that this person in the white car could really have taken Molly. We've never found this person. We've never found the car. At one point, my mom paid Gene Boylan, who did the sketch of the Unabomber, to come out here and draw this person because she just felt like the police sketches that they did with the computer really didn't grasp. And again, that cigarette out with his left hand, she just felt like that was key. So we did get a new sketch that was released over time. And again, we've had a lot of suspects, but you know, nothing has really tied it. What was our biggest break is that there was a man by the name of Tim Mcguigan who what was has been labeled sort of a rogue cop. He was a local police officer in the town of North Brookfield, and he had a high interest in the Holly Perrinian case, and he was writing a book about it. And so he was kind of like obsessed. The man had some personal issues. He had a drinking problem. He had some domestic violence issues, and I think he got thrown out of several police departments. So he was kind of working on this on his own and thinking of himself as his own sort of detective PI kind of thing. And so he kept coming around and talking to my dad about different theories about maybe it was the same person that had taken Holly Perrinian. The unique tie between the Perrinian family and our family even goes deeper because Holly disappeared in 1993. Molly and Holly were the same age, and in 1993 we went to church, and the priest had asked us to please pray for Holly, and Molly was so touched. She was such a sensitive soul that she wrote a letter to Holly's family, and she included a family picture at the time. Of all of us. And they kept that letter. And when Molly disappeared over that time, they came to the house and they showed us that letter, and it sort of united us. And at the time, my parents are my dad's a probation officer, my mom's a teacher. They've always been givers. They've always been sort of the type of people that, I mean, when I was little, we would give mittens to people who didn't have mittens. We were never rich, but my parents sort of taught us that we had privilege. We did have things. We had a roof over our head, and thereby we had to provide for others. We had a responsibility to help and take care of others. And I think because they had that value system and taught us that value system, that after this happened to Molly, and they started talking to people at the National Center, and they talked to the Peranian family, they realized that, you know what, we didn't know. We didn't know that 1 in 6 children is recovered by a good photo of your kid. I mean, how many parents lose their kid in a mall or a shopping center for a second, and or even more, or Six Flags, and that photo is everything. And we didn't know that there was this sort of underground sexual exploitation of children, and trafficking. We didn't know that there were all these crimes against children. We just didn't know.
Right.
They felt very, very strongly that we needed to educate other families, because and we needed to advocate for children, and we needed to create safer communities for our children to grow up in. And so they literally started the Molly Bish Foundation on our kitchen table with the Peranian family right by our side. And they did over 170,000 child IDs in the time that they were active. My parents have since retired. My father ended up having a stroke in 2007. He recovered, but he's limited in his, he can't drive anymore and do these engagements anymore. But in the time that they were very active, they made such a huge difference. They helped bring Amber Alert to Massachusetts. My mother was literally on the phone with Ted Kennedy, giving him hell because he was holding it up because of how they slid term limits for judges, or limits for judges sentencing into the Amber Alert law, and he was concerned about that. And my mom said, "No, bigger picture, we need to protect children." And so Ted voted for that, and they developed a relationship from there. And he was very supportive of my family, and we actually sat at his wake with him. So it was a special relationship. But getting back to Tim Mcguigan, he had this obsession, and he was sitting at a bar with his, I don't know, some hunter, and the hunter was talking about how he had saw pieces of a blue bathing suit in the woods, and Tim said, that's significant because that's what Molly Bish had on. She didn't have an orange typical lifeguard bathing suit, and probably not a lot of people remember that. And so he said, we need to go to this place. And so the next day, the hunter brought Tim up to this place, and they called the police right away. And that's where the search for and the recovery for Molly began. We were incredibly lucky because Dr. Anne Marie Myers was working at the medical examiner's office at the time, and her background is in forensic anthropology. So she designed a grid by grid search over 500 acres. That was the first that was ever done in Massachusetts, and the largest search that was ever conducted in Massachusetts. And they brought in recruits, and they literally went out in June, hottest days, in full gear, searching through thick underbrush, walking up steep hills, uncovering animal bones, and testing, and finding and looking and searching. And they were able to recover 26 of Molly's bones. So we are very, very fortunate that they used that approach to recovering Molly. I don't know that we would have found as much pieces of Molly had we not had that sort of design. This was happening. They started searching for Molly in late May of 2003 when they were alerted to this, and so it took weeks. I mean, they'd find a bone, an arm bone, and they'd find a leg bone. They'd find this, and we didn't know if it was Molly. And what they'd have to do is take mitochondrial DNA and test. So they were taking our DNA and her hairbrushes, and hoping that maybe they would find the skull, because if they could find the skull, they could match the teeth. And one day they did, and I remember I was living in Amherst at the time, and we would drive out to West Warren every day. And I remember getting there. My daughter was by that time 3, and jumping out of the car, 'cause that ride took forever for her, for a little 3-year-old, that 45 minutes. So I remember that day because it was so hot, and the district attorney, the assistant district attorney, and the lead investigator were walking up the driveway in full suits. And I knew that was they were going to tell us it was Molly. I was it seemed like walking up the driveway took forever, and I was ready to run away because I was afraid to find out the truth. But they let us know that they had found the skull, and that they were going to stop the search very soon after that, and make the tooth match. And it would probably take some time before we could identify her and get the remains back. And it did. It took some time. We ended up burying Molly um, on her 20th birthday in August of 2003. Um, Her bones were put in a baby casket, and the baby casket was put into an adult-sized casket, and we put her prom dress in there and her favorite Tigger stuffed animal, and her friends put letters in there, and um, we just put whatever memories we could find. And we had a beautiful, beautiful ceremony and send off and celebration of life. And Rabbi Kushner came out, and Marianne Williamson, and all these amazing, amazing people came, prayed with us. I think Senator Kerry came to the wake. It was really symbolic of what Molly's life had become to represent, and what work my parents had done and given to our community, and later to the Commonwealth as a whole. And since then, we've tried to find this person that put Molly in that position, and it's been very difficult because we only have what came from the recovery scene, very little from the crime scene of where she was abducted from. We've had so many different campaigns over the years. I've hired private investigators. I've put up billboards. I have put posters in the 351 towns in the state. I have just asked people for help in every capacity. My latest endeavor has been to bring familial DNA testing to Massachusetts. It is used in 14 other states. It has a great rate of success because currently, when we have DNA from a crime scene that we can't identify, we can put it into our CODIS system, which means that anyone who's committed a felony in Massachusetts, we can match it to, and then we can do it nationwide. And if it doesn't take a hit, then you're sort of sitting here like we are 20 years later. But what familial DNA does is if there's a slight match, let's say 40%, that means maybe someone in that person's family committed the crime. And so there's a greater amount of police work that goes into it. But it's just due diligence, and it's just science. It's a scientific way to bring you closer and to a better clue to bringing this person to justice.
Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, that was a incredible recounting of the events. Thank you so much for talking so openly about that. I can't even imagine. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to be in your shoes and your family's position. I just have a quick question. Where Molly's body was found, how far away from the family's home was that?
It was about 2.5 miles from our home and about 5 miles from the pond. So it fits the statistical data of, crime scene and dumping bodies. The interesting piece is that where Molly's body was found was like hunting grounds. It was a sort of it's a on a road, on the side of a road, very steep inclination. Happens to be where people there's a hunting area, happens to be where people hunt. And so I guess like in Massachusetts, bobcats have certain trails that they run certain areas. And it just happened to be a place where a particular bobcat traversed. So how much did this person know about the area? I think a lot. He must know that Molly was going to be alone at a pond. He had the opportunity to grab her without anybody hearing or seeing anything, and she was only there for 8 days, literally on 8 days. And it had been broken up over weekends, and this is her first official week. Where she was found it was hunting grounds. So again, it was a remote area. It wasn't like it was, on the way anywhere or near the pond. It was about 5 miles from the pond. So it wasn't, it was definitely on a road leading out of town, but definitely someone knew that they wouldn't be able to find Molly there. I mean, we just got lucky that we were able to find her. And I thank the hunter for being keen enough to identify that blue bathing suit.
Yeah. So in 2009, there was a suspect that sort of emerged, and he had been convicted of murdering his girlfriend, and he was a former Florida resident. What's your theories on him? What's your thoughts on this guy?
Yeah, he was really interesting. He actually was from Southbridge, Mass. It's not far from where we lived and where Molly trained to be a lifeguard. Where he lived is not far from where Molly's training occurred. So if Molly happened to go up for a Dunkin' Donuts, she may have run into him. It's hard for us to know. Molly was pretty friendly and engageable. So would she talk to someone in line at the Dunkin' Donuts? Probably. Would she say, "Oh yeah, I'm training to be a lifeguard. I'm taking a class down there." It's possible she said all that. Uh, he's the only person that has actually committed a murder. He fits the composite sketch. He is drug addicted and violent. He has a history of dealing drugs with his brothers, history of violence against women. So he was a hunter and a fisherman, and he just actually got his fishing license renewed that April before Molly disappeared. So there's a lot of ties to Rodney Stanger, but again, haven't been able to rule him out.
And his DNA, so you I guess don't know if his DNA was tested. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. What I do know is that tests like what I want to happen against this unidentified DNA have to be carefully done because you don't want to ruin the sample and not be able to test it again. And it's quite expensive. And Massachusetts doesn't have the capacity to do that. So we send out our testing to Parabon. Now, when they sent out Rodney's DNA in 2009, Kathy Curran is a has become a good friend of mine. She works at Channel 5. She's an investigative reporter, and she and I would call every week and say, "Any word on the DNA yet? Any word on the DNA yet?" And they'd say, "Anytime now, anytime now." That happened for 6 weeks. We were calling the state police. At one point, about 6 weeks into it, they called all of a sudden and said, "Heather, we're not going to talk to you about DNA anymore." "What are you talking about? Why not? I'm waiting for 6 weeks. Like, we might have our guy. Like, this might be it." Like, I've been bracing myself to take this next step. Like, what's going to happen in a case or whatever. You sort of try to mentally prepare yourself. And they said, "We're not," they just repeated, "We're not going to talk to you about DNA." Well, I was pissed. So I called Parabon and I said, "Did you do the test?" And they said, "Yeah, but we can't tell you anything." I said, "I know that. I just want to make sure that you actually did the freaking test. Like, I don't know what these guys are doing." They got so pissed that I called Parabon. Like, it was like a slap in the face or something. But what happened is there was some communication issue or something happened within the state police and the crime lab, and it hadn't been tested in the lab, so they had sent it to Parabon. So they were covering they were covering their asses basically. And over the 20 years, I have learned a lot, about the criminal justice system, and I can tell you a lot of things for sure. It is incredibly biased. I recognize that Molly's case has privilege because she's a white, pretty blonde girl. And because of that, I try to share and talk about other cases in Massachusetts because Molly's not the only girl that was abducted and murdered. There's so many cases out there and we don't talk about them. And not every family has the ability to go on the news, or does not every family works in a court system, so they have the support of the criminal justice system. We got lucky that way. If my daughter was abducted, would I have that same support? I don't know. I'm a teacher. I'm not a probation officer. I know that these guys would much rather deal with my father than they do with me, because I push a little bit and I don't let them give me the bullshit answers. They have Oh gosh, so many times they have told me one thing and done another. Your investigation is only as good as the investigator that's working on it. Oftentimes we find out information from the media and not from the state police, um, about my own case.
Yeah, that
I mean, Bob Ward went down to check on Rodney Stanger's trailer because it hadn't even been looked at, and the guy was sitting in months for 6 months, sitting in jail for 6 months. No one even looked. No one said a damn thing. No, and Bob found more things than anybody. It's a very difficult system to work with, and so I always appreciate guys like you who are pushing these cases out and talking about them. My friend in Minnesota, the Wetterling family. Jacob was abducted in 1988, and his case was just solved a couple years ago, and it was all because of people talking about it on the internet. And there was a woman who was blogging about these boys getting sexually assaulted in this particular town, and they tied it to Jacob, and they were able to get his killer. But guess what? He was never tried for murder. The family had to freaking make a deal with this guy to find the body. And so this guy can sit in a jail for the rest of his life as a sexually dangerous person on a porn charge, but not for murder.
Oh, that's frustrating.
We need to protect victims. We need to protect each other. And that's what I see you guys doing. You're helping us stay protected. Talking about these cases, making people aware, making people understand that the justice system doesn't necessarily work, and that we have to take care of each other. That's the most important thing.
I'm curious how good your mom says the composite sketch was, like how accurate it looked to the person she saw.
The one the police did, she did not feel was accurate. The one that Jean Boylan did, she was very happy with. That cost my parents $10,000 of their personal funds to get that picture done. My mother, trying to, she was very concerned about the smoking and how his hairline was, and she kept saying he was Portuguese. I'm not really sure, um, why. She just felt like he was like sort of darker skinned. I don't know if it's her references from growing up in a Michigan neighborhood or something. I'm not really clear. I haven't really been able to figure that one out yet myself. But of all the people that we've had, no one has exactly been, that's it, However, sketches, I don't know, memory and things like that can play tricks on you, I think. So I wouldn't take that as, we haven't identified the person. I think the person that did this is certainly in our pile of people that we've collected over the last 20 years. I just don't not sure which one it is. We've had a number of suspects. We had this person in Florida. We had someone come up who was working on a child custody case and was investigating for that particular thing. And when he started uncovering things, it led him to believe that this person could be responsible for Molly as well. And he was convicted of rape. Ended up committing suicide in jail in Western Mass. I again, I'm not sure if they were able to get some DNA. I would assume they would have gotten some DNA from him. It's got to be someone in that pile. I'm just not sure where. What has become very clear to me is that I think that we think that there's one bad guy. One bad guy killed Molly. One bad guy killed Holly Peranian. It's just this one guy. But there's a lot of bad guys out there. There's actually probably one bad guy for every dead girl out there. And that's the reality. We're sitting next to the bad guys when we're taking the bus. We're sitting next to them when we're sitting in church. We're sitting next to them in movie theaters and dropping them off at baseball practice. These people are in our society and in deep, and these crimes, these sexual crimes against children, has been hidden for a long time. And I think that hopefully, with the work that we're all doing and the attention that we're bringing to sexual crimes, that we can sort of uncover this layer that sort of lies beneath the surface, and has has very detrimental consequences on our society. I mean, I think, the scandal in the Catholic Church, the scandals that have plagued the gymnastics teams, that exists in every field. I mean, there's people that commit these crimes in hospitals and in churches and schools. We just need to really, really be aware that monsters don't look like monsters. They look like our neighbors.
Is there anything that people out there listening can do with the bill that's out there now?
Yes, I would say please call your state legislator. Let them know that you support familial DNA testing in Massachusetts. It's incredibly important to all of us, not just victims of crimes and not just the unidentified bodies that are collected in the morgue in Massachusetts. I mean, that's a whole other piece that we didn't even get into, but we do have a lot of unidentified bodies. But for everybody, for each of us to be able to feel safe, that our child can stand at a bus stop, they can go ride their bike to their neighbors. We need to do everything we can to put the bad guys in jail and keep our community, our families, our friends safer. And so if you please would call your legislator and let them know you support this bill and you expect and hope that they will too, that'd be great. I'd be incredibly grateful to you. And so would every family of abducted child in Massachusetts.
Well, Heather, my proverbial hat is tipped to you because it's very impressive to see somebody who had such a tragedy occur to them and their family turn it into something so positive and so productive to prevent that for other families.